The 2024 Pokemon TCG World Championships have come and gone, and while most of us are still recovering from all the excitement, drama, and tension from all the exciting games we watched, trainers across North America are sharpening their skills and getting ready for the first regional championship in Baltimore. The 2025 season has completely shifted how players qualify to the World Championships, changing from a set number of points required to being one of the best in your region. On September 14, a brand new era of the Pokemon TCG begins, and this tournament will be played in the same format as the World Championships, so many players are left wondering, how popular will Iron Thorns be? Is Regidrago still the best deck? Are evolution-based decks not viable anymore? In this video, we are going to analyze how I think the tiers have shifted after the results from Worlds, and what I expect will be the decks to beat at Baltimore. Now be advised that this list stems from my own testing, knowledge and theory, so please bear that in mind when a deck outside the S tier does well. Doing well at a tournament like this or Worlds requires a powerful deck, luck and skill. So even though a deck might be unfavored or unlikely to do well in theory, that doesn't mean the stars could align for it to do well in the event itself. Don't forget that you can watch videos 24 hours earlier if you become a channel member by following the link in the description below. This kind of support helps me continue to create content like this, so please consider becoming a channel member if you enjoy the content. First off, let's go over the post-World C tier. This tier is composed of decks that showed up at Worlds. Some even got all the way into top 16. But just because a deck has a solid run in the hands of a skilled player doesn't necessarily mean it should be considered a much bigger threat, and it could be down to them dodging a bad matchup multiple times. Goldengo had 2 top 64 placements and 1 top 128. While these results are definitely way above what I expected, it's just not comparable to other similar decks like Raging Bolt, which do a similar strategy but better, and are now less susceptible to disruption thanks to Serendipity, which is what Goldengo offered as a key aspect with its coin bonus ability. One of the coolest decks to come out of the World Championships is Henry Brandt's Banette Dusknoir deck. By item locking your opponent and then systematically taking down threats through the use of Dusknoir's Cursed Blast and benefiting from giving your opponent prize cards during your turn to power up Poltergeist, this deck could have been amazing to see perform well. Unfortunately though, it didn't, as Henry finished with a 5-3 record, so this deck has consolidated itself as an archetype, but it might be a bit too fragile to succeed at the top. Giratina was nowhere to be seen all day, both in terms of numbers and good showings. Yes, the deck is an archetype, that exists, but between the threat of Kyurem and Regidrago being a better Giratina deck itself, there's very few reasons to play this at all. Next is Chenpao, which is once again dismantled by the wide array of attacks that Regidrago can utilize, and under normal circumstances, the deck just has trouble keeping up with that and other top tier decks. Lucas Singh was able to get top 16 though, with an innovative list featuring a 1-1 Palkia, and 3 other players made it to day 2. As for Lost Box, a single hero made day 2, Marcos Cifuentes, the world champion's brother, with a Sablezard variant. Perhaps that variant has a chance at competing, and it did feature the double mana feed to protect from the Kyurem plus Cologne combo. If the format switches to more aggressive big basic decks with the likes of Miraidon and Roaring Moon occupying a higher meta share, this might have a chance at doing better, and is the perfect example of a deck that could end up having a great weekend at Baltimore despite being in tier C. Finally, we have Dragapult, a deck I initially rated quite high, even went as far as to think it would be the best deck in the format based on tournament results in Japan when Twilight Masquerade was coming out, but I have been constantly disappointed by it afterwards. There is only one player that made day 2 with the deck, finishing in top 128, and the deck is simply a worse Dragapult deck than Regidrago. I'm now of the idea that until Regidrago rotates next year, Dragapult will likely never be able to outshine it at all, but the deck does get a few cool new upgrades with Stellar Crown for major tournaments after Baltimore. Moving on to the B tier, these decks had very good performances at Worlds, with decks like Miraidon EX and Roaring Moon EX having amazing runs in the hands of fantastic players. So why are their ranks so low, you ask? Well, keep watching to find out. First, we have one of the hottest topics online right now, Ancient Box. The deck's hype online is crazy, and I'd say with good reason. Ancient Box has seen more success than I initially expected it to have, winning Worlds and Juniors and dominating day 1 in the hands of 2017 World Champion Diego Casiraga. It has adapted and now dedicates spots to both Petron DX and Serendipity X to have switching outs as well as backup draw and recovery against its biggest enemy in hand disruption. If Charizard is kept in check by Regidrago, then this deck can potentially take down all the Regidrago counters such as Roaring Moon, Miraidon, Raging Bolt and Iron Thorns. And speaking of Roaring Moon, clearly I underrated the deck, and I was too focused on trying to make the Radiant Greninja variant with Water Energy, Canceling Cologne and Energy Switch work. But as finalist Seinosuke showed us all, the turbo version is best simply focusing on attacking as soon as possible. Now this deck definitely had a bit of a surprise factor going for it at Worlds, but now everyone is aware of how good and threatening it is. I expect this deck to be quite popular at Baltimore given its success at the World Championships, and also very successful, but it's not ranked higher due to having the same issue of falling apart if it fails to take a significant KO on the first turn. Next we have Snorlax, a deck that everyone loves to hate. When there is a big light shining onto Snorlax and how scary it is, that's when people are most likely to counter it. However, now that the deck sort of flunked at the World Championships after a lot of hype and fear towards it, now is when respect for the deck is at its lowest point. However, this might be justified as at least in my testing, the deck has awful Regidrago, Gardevoir and Iron Thorns matchups, as well as Ancient Box now that it plays Pecharunt. But as always, when this deck is least respected is when it tends to do well, and it's a deck that many top players gravitate towards, so with the right list, it could have a deep run. And now, Miraidon had an amazing run at the World Championships, piloted by Jesse Parker. His list was very versatile with inclusions such as Bloodwind or Saluna, and relying on the variants of Electric Generator to pull through for it. When they hit, the deck's high speed is quite crucial to deal with many decks before they get a chance to get going. The Charizard matchup is an issue for it no matter what though, but it can outspeed the powerful V-Star decks like Lugia and Regidrago, as well as have Iron Hands as a threat against Gardevoir. And finally, Pidgey Control thrives in a well-established metagame because they have a clearer path on what to counter. Despite Lugia being a headache for the deck to deal with, Alessandro Cremascoli was able to get top 32 with the deck, featuring some really cool options like Genesect, Sandshrew, the Ogre Pond pair, to help trap with Sob or wall with Cornerstone Stance, Blood Moon, Penny Loop, Luxray V to Fang Snipe resources, and many more. Surprisingly, Alessandro didn't play Zero Zig's Machinations, but it's something that I think is reasonable to expect if you're playing against these decks. Now the metagame is a bit clearer after Worlds, and thus we could see this deck succeed at this event. And now we move on to the A tier, where these decks not only had good showings at the World Championships and placed highly as expected, but most of all, regardless of one tournament's result, these decks are simply inherently powerful and very threatening in the metagame. First is Gardevoir, incredibly resilient and can produce masterful comebacks consistently. Placing twice in the top 32 at the World Championships, it did well but didn't dominate the tournament like it did at NAIC. The deck has fantastic attackers, as Drifloon and Screamtail are as threatening as ever and probably more effective now as the format shifts to big basics, and thus there is a real need to have good 1-for-2 price trade-offs against decks like Raging Bolt, Roaring Moon and Miraidon. Fluttermane and Klefki provide protection against Iron Thorns and slow down most decks in general. Monkey Dury not only adds a way to spread damage and fixes some numbers to allow Drifloon and Screamtail to reach for some KOs, it also makes Gardevoir itself more threatening by healing the self damage and using that to increase the damage output. Between its adaptability, disruption, and fantastic single price attackers, Gardevoir has what it takes to overcome any obstacle, despite all the playable cards from Shrouded Fable affecting it negatively in some way. But Gardevoir's issue remains the early game and the time it takes to set up with fragile and clunky starts. Coming up next is the World Champion deck, Iron Thorns. Iron Thorns' initialization ability shutting down other rulebox Pokemon is amazing, and since it's the only Pokemon you play, your opponent will never have a chance to not have to deal with it. Bringing down other broken decks to your level and slowing them down proved to be quite effective when combined with other forms of disruption such as Judge, Crushing Hammer, and the ability to gust as well thanks to Pokemon Catcher and Prime Catcher. Shutting down Squawkabilly, Pheasantipity, Tealmask Ogerpon, Pidgeot, Pecharunt, Rotom, Radiant Greninja, Radiant Charizard, Lumineon, Regidrago, Lugia, Charizard, and Gardevoir, and I guess you get it now? It brings a lot of the top tier decks to their knees. But now that it won the World Championships, we might see more Fluttermanes and Canceling Colognes in decks that don't usually run them in order to counter it more effectively. And now let's talk about Charizard. The deck had a lot, and I mean a lot of representation in day 2, with every list except Torts featuring Dusknoir. Whilst Torts' deck was the highest placing at 10th place and included some funky cards like Thornton and Rapska, focusing more on the more standard list, Charizard is uniquely positioned in the metagame at the moment despite having a really bad Regidrago matchup. It can easily handle some of the big basics decks that try to outspeed Regidrago such as Roaring Moon, Miraidon and Raging Bolt. With a good matchup spread against those decks, as well as the power of Quick Search at your disposal every turn, and perhaps a bigger focus on Radiant Charizard usage early on, I could see Charizard having a very successful weekend at Baltimore Regionals. I've seen many people disregarding this deck, and I think it's a big mistake to underestimate it after it had so many people in Day 2 of the World Championships using it to a good degree of success. The final Tier 8 deck is Raging Bolt. This Thunderous deck made it all the way through to top 8, piloted by James Goring, and had quite a few other placements in Day 2 as well. This deck is very fast and straightforward, and as expected, Fezandipity's extra protection against Unfirst Stamp and Iodo proved to be very effective in order to continue to use Professor Sal's Vitality every turn possible. The deck's great Regidrago matchup likely helped James achieve such a good result, ultimately getting stopped by Roaring Wind in top 8. But with 4 Regidrago in top 8 as well, a slight change in people's resistances could have led this deck to finish even higher, as I expect the metagame in Baltimore to greatly resemble the one at the World Championships with Regidrago as the #1 deck. This deck's speed, simplicity, and the multiple ghosting effects to pressure important or key Pokemon since the very first turn could help it go even deeper this weekend. And thus, we arrive at the S tier, with Lugia and Regidrago at the very top, enjoying their time at the top one last time before they rotate next year. Starting with Lugia, this deck has a fantastic showing with plenty of players in top 32 and many more in Day 2. Despite this deck seemingly having a difficult time discarding Archeops, it was able to do so successfully to claim these top spots at the arguably hardest tournament of the season. Cinccino is the real star of the show for the deck, as in this metagame where most decks are trying to take 2 prizes over the course of 3 consecutive turns to do the infamous 2-2-2, Cinccino gives that option to Lugia V-Star decks but also prevents other decks from doing so. Legacy Energy on Iron Hands also plays into this perfectly, as it makes Iron Hands be worth a single prize card whilst taking 2. Despite not being able to achieve top 8, it is clear Lugia is one of the top decks and should remain the second most popular deck this upcoming weekend in Baltimore. As for lists though, they were all over the place at the very top, and perhaps there's no optimal 60, but there also isn't much room to play surprises either. With the format shifting away from evolutions, Wellspring Ogerpon shouldn't be heavily played, but perhaps there's merit to it for this weekend in case Charizard makes a comeback to counter those scary big basic decks, which also tend to have a decent Lugia matchup as they can rush an opponent whom only manages to bench a single Lugia thanks to Pokemon catchers. And to nobody's surprise, the most popular deck at the World Championships was also the most successful. Had Ian Robb not done what he did and moved on to top 4, and if things played out as they did in Azul's show match between him and Jesse Parker, then we could be talking about Regidrago as world champion. Regardless though, not winning the tournament doesn't mean it's not the top deck, and anyone who argues it isn't is just flat out wrong at this point. Only a crazy person would say Regidrago V-Star sucks, right? Right? Shrouded Fable brought 2 key cards to an already powerful deck in Kyurem and Fezandipity, and they were both included in almost all the top performing Regidrago decks. With Regidrago being a resilient and versatile attacker with no weakness, backed by a great support Pokemon with a powerful secondary typing in Teal Mask Ogerpon, and having great answers to control or stall decks with Switch, Canceling Cologne, and Prime Catcher already included naturally in the deck, alongside the possibility to reuse them at any given moment thanks to Legacy Star, this deck really has it all. With 4 top 8 placements, a win in the seniors division, and no changes in the card pool between the World Championships and Baltimore, it might be fated for Regidrago to win this tournament. This covers how I think the tiers and metagame has shifted since Worlds and leading into the final regional of the season. Regardless of who or what deck wins, we are guaranteed to see some amazing matches between some of the best Pokemon TCG players in the world. However, after Baltimore, we are going to have a huge stretch of continuous premier tournaments in the Stellar Crown metagame all over the globe. And while we are all eager to get the 2025 season in full swing, I also can't wait to start playing with the new Stellar Crown decks and updating the current archetypes, so be sure to stay tuned into the channel and subscribe if you haven't yet. I hope this video has been useful for you, and if you're heading to Baltimore, I wish you the best of luck, and I'd love to hear what you think will do well at the regional this weekend and how you think things will unfold after the 2024 World Championships. Thanks for watching, and until next time. If you want to support the channel, you can use code tablemon to get 5% off at Potent Store for your online codes, 10% off for your sealed product at Flipside Gaming, and 10% off on your aluminum accessories at TC Evolutions. Or if you're looking to buy singles or sleeves, you can fill up your cart and close the tab, then click on the affiliate link in the description and check out. That way you can support the channel over at TCG Player, Card Market, and Dragon Shield. ¿Eres de México y necesitas cartas de Pokémon? Busca Hyperbeam Cards en Facebook e Instagram. Y si estás en Tijuana, búscalos en el local C27 en el Centro Comercial Otay.